Halo semuanya, Assalamualaikum. Balik lagi di video reaction saya kali ini guys, oke? Semoga semuanya sehat selalu. Nah, kali ini saya mau tengok video tentang ini ya. Bule-bule kompak menyoroti dan mendukung Timnas Indonesia di kualifikasi Piala Dunia 2026 yang akan melawan Bahrain. Timnas Indonesia ya telah berjaya menarik perhatian para komentator bule-bule gitu kan di luar negeri dengan prestasi yang dipamerkan sampai setakat ini gitu kan, yang sudah pun berjaya tahan imbang ini dalam 2 perlawanan sebelumnya, dan ini kita akan saksikan lawan Bahrain pula ini ya nanti. So jangan lama-lama lagi, mari sama tengok video ini. Let's go.
Sorry, Indonesia. It was a 10-0 win for Bahrain. Those don't come around that often. In fact, back-to-back clean sheets for Bahrain.
For those underdogs, though, I'm expecting the most out of something from Indonesia.
Kesabaran, 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 please. Take some patience, because I think that would actually help them a lot.
Timnas Indonesia saat ini telah menjadi sorotan hangat di berbagai pengamat sepak bola dunia. Walaupun Timnas Indonesia adalah tim dengan peringkat rendah di turnamen lanjutan ini, tidak menyurutkan semangat pengamat sepak bola dunia untuk memberikan dukungannya pada Timnas Indonesia. Hal ini dikarenakan perkembangan Timnas yang semakin masif, serta suporternya yang terkenal asik dan sangat militan dalam membela pejuang negerinya. Membuat sepak bola Indonesia lebih hidup dan penuh gairah.
Finally, Group C with Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia, China, Indonesia, and Bahrain. We've got 3 favorites without a doubt, but potential for some exciting underdog stories. The 3 favorites of this group as well, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Australia, have been in the same group together in this phase of the World Cup qualifiers for 3 years in a row. For those underdogs, though, I'm expecting the most out of something from Indonesia. The national team still has a long way to go, but they are recruiting a lot of dual nationals and are showing signs of improvement. For example, Sandy Walsh, Justin Huber, Jay Idzes, but now recently they've got Martin Paez, the FC Dallas goalkeeper. The national team has been excelling in sides that look to be a more even matchup, but against sides like Australia, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, I do see them struggling. In fact, in the Asian Cup, Indonesia got obliterated by the Socceroos. But in the last round of the World Cup qualifiers, they only lost to Iraq. Best of luck to Indonesia. I'm rooting for you guys to excel. I think they might have what it takes to get a 4th place spot, which would go to the 4th round. But they will struggle against those giants, like I said. But he needs to stay consistent against the weaker teams and hope for one miracle performance against the group giants. When it comes to these 3, I'll make the order as follows: China last, Bahrain 5th, and Indonesia 4th. I'm really in between for that 4th and 5th spot between Bahrain and Indonesia, as I do see Indonesia building momentum and courage to beat the sides that they could potentially have a chance against. And Bahrain's lack of goal scoring might hurt them, but who knows, they could turn up against Indonesia. But at the end, I think Indonesia's courage and new fresh legs can make the difference against them. And I'm sorry, but I do think there will be quite the gap between the bottom 3 versus the top 3. But for those top 3, it will be one hell of a battle.
Perjuangan Indonesia kontra Bahrain juga tidak luput dari perhatian. Indonesia yang pernah dikalahkan 10-0 pada laga terakhir di Bahrain juga menjadi sorotan. Timnas Indonesia dituntut untuk mengambil kehormatannya kembali di kandang Bahrain kali ini. Walaupun tidak mudah, Indonesia akan berjuang dengan penuh kepercayaan diri untuk meraih kemenangan. Skuad yang sudah dipersiapkan sangat bersemangat untuk mengobrak-abrik Timnas Bahrain di kandangnya.
Next up, we go to Bahrain as we head over to the national stadium. Bahrain coming at you with a win and a defeat so far, up against an undefeated Indonesian side. That's right, 58% form for them right now, just 1 defeat in the last 6. Looking pretty good right now. Played 3 times these 2 countries since 2007. We have 2 wins for Bahrain, 1 win for Indonesia. There's been 0 draws between the 2 sides. However, big however, the last time that these 2 sides played in Bahrain, sorry Indonesia, it was a 10-0 win for Bahrain. Those don't come around that often. In fact, back-to-back clean sheets for Bahrain over Indonesia. However, Indonesia started off so far so good with a couple of draws, drawing with heavyweight Saudi Arabia and Australia. Meanwhile, Bahrain picking up a win against Australia, but losing to Japan. So I'm turning to the camera right here, right now. I'm looking at you, Indonesia. I love you. I love you to bits, and I hope you get a good result here. But don't forget to vote. I'm looking at you. I'm calling out for the Indonesian voice. Please look in the description, and I need you guys to vote. But speaking of this game against Bahrain, guess what, folks? Backing your boys to get an upset here. 1-0 win on the road. Indonesia, let's do this. Let's do this, Indonesia. I love you guys. Let's go for it. And I might even do the watch along for this one. I'm on you guys. I'm rooting for Indonesia all the way.
Sementara itu, pengamat sepak bola Amerika yang sangat antusias pada Timnas Indonesia juga memberikan komentarnya. Mereka tidak hanya sekedar berkomentar, akan tetapi juga memberikan sumbangsih koreksi pada pengamatannya. Timnas Indonesia yang dirasa punya potensi besar dengan supporter yang bersemangat, dirasa pantas untuk mendapatkan dukungan penuh dan hasil yang terbaik.
And, I will say, much like the game against Bahrain, Australia dominated this game, at least from a possession perspective. They dictated where the ball was going, how long they held on to it, and when Indonesia got on the ball, they honestly couldn't do much with it. The offensive energy, that really fast counterattacking pace that we saw against Saudi Arabia was not here in Indonesia, unfortunately. But you know what was? Their defense. Once again, and we noted it in the last game for Indonesia, their defense truly has tightened up. Whether it's Idzes, Vrandrik as well, Martin Paes, they all really showed up risky Rito at the back, whether it's getting last-ditch defending stops or just really good shot blocking in general. They completely shut out Australia and limited them to very few genuine chances.
No, bro, let's remind the people, it was just a few months ago where we saw this same Australian team defeat Indonesia 4-0 in the round of 16. To get a 0-0 result the way they did today, I think is very, very impressive. And there's a lot to look at on both sides here, but let's just focus in on Indonesia. A big reason for why they got that clean sheet was Martin Paes.
Yeah.
An incredible performance. Once again, he had about 2-3 really good saves that they could have been goals, and he kept them from going in. And then, like you mentioned, last-ditch defending, just incredible effort all around. But I agree. I was a little disappointed in the lack of offensive threat that they had this game.
Yeah.
A big reason, though, was honestly looking at the Australian defense. I thought Harry Sutar was massive today, bro. Massive. And honestly might have been the player of the match for Australia because he stopped every single Indonesian attack.
There's two things going forward for the rest of the qualifiers that I'm going to be watching out based off of these last two matches, and especially based off of this one. It's going to be when they face against physical teams. So against Saudi Arabia, you can outpace them, and it was clearly seen in that game. Honestly, Indonesia could have scored 2 or 3 goals against them if they were just a little bit more clinical off the pass. But against a team like Australia, they're not going to be as naive to get beaten off the pace. They're going to have better positioning, especially with defenders like Sutar. Even in the midfield, you have really physical midfielders with Jackson Irvine, Keanu Bacchus. So I was really curious to see how Indonesia was going to handle it. And ultimately, they really couldn't handle it. Their offense got pretty much dominated. So I'm going to be looking for that in the future. How do they figure it out against very physical teams? The second thing I'm going to be looking out for is just their defense. I can't believe it's tightened up this quickly over the last 8 months. It's phenomenal. I mean, as you already pointed out, 4 goals they led in the last time I played Australia. But this time, honestly, the defense was just as good as Australia's, and I think that's a really big important point to make, because that means they can go up against one of the best offenses in the region, or at least one of the best teams in the region, and hold their own. So I think for Indonesia, yes, they weren't able to win at home, but the defense really proved the point that they can play now in these qualifiers.
Yeah, and when it comes to them getting on the ball, all I ask from Indonesia, especially when it comes to these type of matchups, is one, to learn to adjust to the opponent, because as you mentioned, you can't outrun these Australians. They're way too smart. They're able to body you. It showed today, but what I was hoping to see was Indonesia adapt and be a little bit more patient when they got the ball, instead of just wanting to go all out, full throttle, the way they did against Saudi Arabia. That's what I asked from them, is to be patient. Pass the ball around. Slow it down just a little bit, bro. I looked up how to say patience in Indonesian, so I can get my message across. I think it's kesabaran. Kesabaran, please. Take some patience because I think that would actually help them a lot because, dude, once again, in back-to-back games, they looked really tired by like the 70th, 80th minute because they just try to put full energy on display. I think if they're patient, if they slow it down, it'll help the team, it'll help the energy levels. And in this sort of case, I think it would actually help them potentially score a goal against Australia as they try to put more pressure on this Australian defense by possession instead of counter-attacking.
It also is interesting how far Indonesia had to travel based off of the first game. I mean, they were in Saudi Arabia on Thursday. Cut to 4 days later, they had to travel over 1,000 miles to get to Indonesia. Pretty crazy. That's just Asian World Cup qualifiers in general. Japan had to do it. Saudi Arabia had to do it as well. Australia wasn't as aggressive as they just had to go, a little bit northwest to get to Indonesia. But I do think, especially for a team like Indonesia that really relies on pace and energy, these travel distances might come into play in these World Cup qualifiers. So maybe get their points in those first match days, and the second match days maybe go for draws. I do think it's going to play a big factor.
I also think the Indonesian support that we saw was just as much as I would hope it to be.
Oh, yeah,
it was
dope.
insane. The crowd was ridiculous. One of the best Asian atmospheres out there. I give them their credit for that. That was incredible to see them play at home. My question to you is this then. With 2 Indonesian games now in the books, what would you grade their overall window so far? What would you grade it? Based off what we saw against Saudi Arabia and against Australia, where does it land?
It's an A. Like, it's top notch, right under an A+. And the reason why giving it so high, even though they only have 2 points after it, is you have to consider Indonesia has never even gotten close to this point. And you start off against 2 continental giants in Saudi Arabia and Australia, and you're able to go toe-to-toe with them, almost beat Saudi Arabia, and get a very well-earned draw against Australia. I think for a nation that is as inexperienced as Indonesia, they pass with flying colors. These are 2 very positive performances. So I thought honestly that they were going to lose one of these games.
Yeah, no, me too.
For me, the expectation was that they were going to drop even more points in this window, but instead they played brilliant football against Saudi Arabia, and I really did think they earned the draw against Australia. Even though Australia played a little bit better, I think they deserved the point. So Indonesia going forward, I think, have proven to us and to the world, if they're watching, that they are going to fight not just for a 3rd or 4th place position in their group, they're going to fight for that 2nd place spot underneath Japan.
Oke guys, jadi ya videonya ini jadi dibahas ya oleh beberapa komentator bule-bule daripada luar negeri tentang Timnas Indonesia gitu ya. Benar-benar sebuah fenomenal gitu, Timnas Indonesia berada di round ketiga kualifikasi Piala Dunia 2026 ini ya, betul-betul menjadi sorotan, betul-betul mendapat perhatian gitu ya, dengan beberapa perkembangan yang sangat besar. Sampai dibahas sedetail itu gitu kan. Jadi mudah-mudahan nanti perlawanan Indonesia lawan Bahrain gitu ya, semoga Indonesia dapat beroleh kemenangan ini. Amin. So, terima kasih banyak sebab kamu sudah menonton video ini. Jangan lupa macam biasa untuk support channel saya dengan subscribe, like video ini, dan jangan lupa untuk komen juga, oke? Terima kasih banyak dan kita jumpa lagi di video seterusnya. Assalamualaikum.